My name is Emma McGrattan, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer at a company called Actian. Actian, up until last year, was in the business of connecting, managing, and analyzing data. And as we were helping our customers get ready for AI in their data quality efforts, we realized that data governance was hugely important, and we didn't have a solution for that. So a year ago, we got into the governance space through an acquisition that we did. And what we've learned is that a lot of companies are really focused on getting their data ready for AI from a quality perspective. But what they haven't thought about is the next biggest challenge is going to be governance. And what does it mean to get governance wrong, right, when you get quality right? So what I'm here to talk about today is some of the findings that Actian has uncovered over the past year when it comes to data prep for AI, specifically around quality and governance. I've been at Actian for 33 years. I've been in the relational database space originally, then moved into columnar analytics, from there into integration, and most recently then obviously into governance. What you'll see on the screen here is a Gartner research that was done on top 5 investment trends for the next 2 to 3 years. Right? So what data management efforts are being funded and what are being prioritized. And what you'll see is the dark blue represents the sum of the top 5 initiatives. The orange is their first choice. And what you'll see is that for some initiatives, there's a big difference between what's happening in Asia Pacific versus North America, what's happening in EMEA versus North America, or North America versus EMEA. I think Asia Pacific is such a giant region right now that it's difficult to say there's any one thing happening, right? When we go to Australia, there's not a ton of AI happening. You go to China, it's completely different. But when we look at where the top 3 initiatives are, right? The first is investment in AI-ready data initiatives. Quite obvious, right? Every organization is being pressured by their board or by their leadership team to get their data ready for their AI initiatives because they feel like they're falling behind everybody else when it comes to rolling out AI. The second is data quality and governance. And being frank, I think this is also in support of their AI initiatives. And then the last is building out data products, right? So understanding the fact that their data ecosystem spans many generations of technologies, that it's always additive, right? You're always adding new data technologies, and very rarely do we take things away because we've no idea where our dependencies are on those downstream things. So understanding, what do they need to do to put an architecture in place that can support the delivery of data as product. And if you missed my colleague Jean-Georges Perrin's session right before this one on data contracts, I do recommend that you catch the replay. He did a phenomenal job, so well done, Jean-Georges. So let's talk about what's going on at the moment. So this comes from an MIT survey. And what MIT found was that in 76% of organizations, they've deployed AI today in 1 to 3 use cases, right? So it's the simple stuff. It's using Copilot in the programming role, right? It's using Gemini or Copilot to summarize meetings and to capture your action items. It's using AI in scanning your documentation and your knowledge base in order to provide better customer service in multiple languages. So we'll see, most organizations have already ticked the box in those very simple use cases. But 50% expect to have fully deployed AI in the next 2 years. And I find that number completely staggering because we can't go from 1 to 3 to complete deployment of something that we don't even know what it is today within the next 2 years. But what's incredibly important is that if that's what the enterprise is stating as their goal in the next 2 years, today it's fundamental that we're looking at the foundations of data management so that we can support that goal. Because 2 years from now is far too late to be looking at governance challenges if the organization is expecting that you've rolled out fully deployed AI. I have to be honest, does anybody in the room believe that 50% number? Is anybody expected to be fully deployed? Yeah, I didn't think so. It's like, I haven't seen this level of optimism since, Hadoop was a thing 10 years ago, right? And they told us that it was the last data platform we were ever going to need. I think the numbers are way off, but I do think that at the board level and at the executive level, this is their expectation, and I think they're in for a very rude awakening. So speaking of rude awakenings, another statistic that's quite sobering, and I don't like to use that word quite often, 60% of AI projects are going to fail if you don't have an AI-ready data practice in place, right? 60%. So to put that in perspective, I'd invite you to look to the person to your right. Come on, you can do it. And now look to the person to your left. Only one of the three is going to be successfully deploying AI in the next couple of years, right? It's staggering how we're expected to fail in something that the business knows is critical to the success of the business going forward. So when we talk to prospects about where are their challenges, we hear all kinds of things, right? They really can't figure out data governance, right? They're thinking of data governance in terms of regulatory compliance and not thinking about it as an enabler for innovation. So they're really stuck on building out data governance policies that are strict enough so that they can conform to any requirements that they may have with respect to PII data and so on, but also that are liberal enough that you can innovate with the data. We also find that they get really stuck on using AI in their data management practices, right? So using AI to identify outliers in a field, to identify where a number is not in the range that was anticipated, and to identify the root cause and to correct that. We also find that there's a lot of concerns around the ethical use of AI, right? And providing their end customers with transparency into the data that was used to train the models and into the models themselves. And finding the infrastructure to support your AI initiatives can be incredibly expensive, right? It's eye-watering, the amount of money that has to be spent to support these large-scale data processing requirements. So we at Actian firmly believe that any application that relies on good data is going to fail without good governance. And the analogy that I like to use here is, if I'm tasked with preparing an incredible meal for a special occasion, right, and I go to the local farmer's market and I find the most succulent oysters they've got on sale, and I find a chicken that's been hand-fed corn its entire life and some amazing artichokes, right? So I've got the best quality ingredients, like the best quality data, but I go home and I have no idea about food prep, right? It's just not my thing. And now all of a sudden I'm preparing raw chicken with raw oysters, and we've got salmonella or botulism or anything could go wrong, right? So not understanding data governance practices is very similar to not understanding the food prep practices, right? You can have the best ingredients, highest quality data in the world, but without good governance, the results can be catastrophic. So we wanted to understand where the market is with respect to data governance, right? What are some of the data management and data governance challenges that our customers and our prospects are faced with? So we employed a third party to do a survey for us, and they went out to 600 senior leaders across enterprises in 7 countries, representative of where we think our best opportunities are, and across 7 industries. So it spanned highly regulated industries like financial services and healthcare, as well as some of the ones like manufacturing that aren't quite as heavily regulated. But we really wanted to get a finger on the pulse of what's happening in the data governance space. And the results were quite interesting, but not terribly surprising. So when we look at why organizations are prioritizing data governance, for a lot of them it was that they wanted to improve data quality. So it's the completeness of the data, it's the accuracy of the data, it's the timeliness of the data, but it's also things like, who owns this data, right? If I have a problem with the data, who do I call? It's making sure that there's an SLA in place for the data that we're going to be using. It's making sure that we've got data that's consistent and that we can trust, and that we can trust the outcomes of the AI. So, prioritizing data governance to improve our data quality was not a surprise to us. And very closely behind that was a prioritization of data governance because they're implementing AI. So it was not hugely surprising to us, but we did find that where people were getting stuck was all over the place, right? So the word cloud here represents how frequently these words came up in the free-form text relating to challenges that they were really having a hard time overcoming. Number 1 was data architecture, and not really a surprise, because we're talking to the enterprise. And the enterprise has technologies, when it comes to data, from every different vintage, right? We talk to financial services companies, and it's shocking how many core banking applications are still running on mainframes, right? So being able to provide that data all the way from the mainframe through to edge devices provides a challenge when it comes to choosing the right data architecture and making sure that we've got that firm. We've got a lot of organizations are looking at moving to lake houses, lake bases, moving to cloud storage, moving some workloads to cloud, repatriating some workloads from cloud to on-premises. So the data architecture required to support data governance is a real challenge, and it was top of the list when we talked to customers about where they were stuck. The next challenge that they identified was governance, right? And when it comes to governance, what we found is that a lot of organizations are still trying to figure out, where does governance sit, right? Do you want to have centralized governance in IT? And then that becomes a bottleneck, and it's always going to be business functions like finance that are going to get prioritization when it comes to their governance needs, and not so much functions like marketing, right? But without marketing, sales don't happen. Without sales, finance doesn't matter anymore, right? So what we're finding in a lot of organizations is that they want to have a centralized governance function, and that will dictate things like, how do we handle PII data, right? What level of anonymization or obfuscation may be required? But then they want to, push governance out into the domains so that each domain, like the marketing domain, will have responsibility for governance of marketing data, right? Manufacturing will have responsibility for their own data. So that way you can have within each domain across the organization a level of expertise when it comes to the domain knowledge as well as governance, right? So you've got that governance expertise married with domain expertise, and then you've got the central standards in place, and that we find is where most companies are being successful. So when it comes to governance, that kind of that hybrid approach, where you've got the centralized IT defining the governance for items like PII data, and then each domain having its own expertise. Another challenge that we identified was finding qualified data staff is really hard, right? And keeping them is really hard. So a lot of organizations instead are trying to grow them by providing training, right? And making sure that they have a team of data professionals across the business. And what we've seen in many organizations is now they're hiring for data skills in functions that are not directly related to data, because they want to have that data expertise, that data curiosity, that familiarity with the data so you can identify when something's not right across the organization. So providing for that training is important. And then data literacy is really important, right? So I recently published an article in Forbes where I talk about data literacy from the perspective of understanding weather, right? You can probably tell from the accent I'm from Ireland, and every conversation starts with weather, right? And what I'd always thought was, like, when the weather forecaster says there's a 60% chance of rain today, that they're just hedging their bets, right? It's more likely to rain than not. It's Ireland, it rains every day, right? But what it actually means is there's a 100% chance that it's going to rain in 60% of the forecast area, right? I'm a data person, a data nerd. I thought I understood data. I learn something new every day, right? We, at Actian, we've got some incredibly smart people. We were doing some performance benchmarks where we measured our performance versus our competitors. And the results were so varied that we had to present the results on the y-axis in a logarithmic scale. It was shocking how few people were able to understand what it meant to relay results in a logarithmic scale and how to read that, right? So data literacy is incredibly important. Building an organization that is data literate and encouraging that literacy through gamification, we find works pretty well. So at Actian, we do a monthly all-hands call, and at the beginning of the all-hands call, we have a little quiz, and part of that quiz is on data literacy. We try to make it fun and trying to educate the team on all aspects of that. Another thing that's really important when you want to improve data literacy across the organization is to have a single business glossary, and that business glossary will define how we talk about things within the business. So like, what does ARR mean in our context, right? So understanding how the company talks about the business is really important, and having that standardized glossary that everybody can use helps with improving literacy. Again, I really encourage people to hire people that are data curious and to encourage them to ask questions of the data that can support their gut feel about what's going on. I think it really helps. And then the final thing on here that really popped up in terms of a real challenge that people are getting stuck is data quality, right? And how do we address our data quality challenges? So it's the completeness of the data, it's the accuracy of the data, it's whether or not it needs to be unique or duplicates are allowed. So putting those data quality rules in place and then making sure that we're enforcing those rules through observability, right? So making sure that the data that we have is conforming to the norms that we've set for that particular data set. And of course, it varies widely by use case, right? Getting back to financial services, our accounting teams want 100% accuracy 100% of the time. Marketing teams, maybe not so much, right? Maybe if 10% of the email address fields coming out at an event like this are illegible, right? Maybe that's okay. So really understanding data quality in the context of how that data is going to be used is very important. So then moving on, looking at some of the other challenges to overcome, 97% said they had data management challenges. And I think that number could even be higher, right? And then 83% acknowledged that they have governance and compliance challenges. And when we ask them, when digging into where these challenges come from, scale and complexity of the data that they're dealing with, right? So what we found is that every organization has siloed data, right? They have data that's in cloud, they've got data that's being accumulated within applications, they've got data on premises, they've got data that they just don't even know the source of, right? So being able to understand the entire data landscape across the organization, to understand the lineage and how it all comes together, how it's being used within the organization, the context in which it's being used, all incredibly important to address when you really want to put strong data management foundations in place to support your AI initiatives. Next challenge that they faced was around access and security, right? Understanding who can access what data to what level, right? Do we need to obfuscate the data? Do we anonymize it? How exactly is it being used? And what are the requirements that are that need to be met when it comes to storing and accessing that information? Then, making it easy for people to access data, right? If you're trying to run a report and you find that you don't have access to a data set that's required for it, and you request access, you kind of want that to be immediate, or you've moved on to your next thing, and the data that you require to answer a question is probably not going to be available to you in time, so you'll make a decision that's not based on the data, but that's based on gut feel. We have a lot of concern around trusting data when we're unsure about data quality, right? So that was the next area that came up as a real challenge that they needed to overcome was, how do we make sure that we've got data of the right quality for the use case that we're looking at and then have trustworthy outcomes? So that was important. And then, as I said, finding the skills within the organization to really build on that data literacy and to build out a data culture where every decision that you're making within the business has an element of gut feel to it, but it's supplemented by the data, right? And what we have found is in organizations where there's a top-down push to be data-driven, where the executive team are demonstrating that they're using the data to supplement their decision-making, and they can point to the data, and that they're constantly looking at KPIs or OKRs, we found that top-down pushing of a data culture works much more effectively than trying to have a bottom-up approach, right? So if you're people that are touching the data, obviously, they're making data-driven decisions, and it can be frustrating for them if they're not seeing that further up the organization. They're leveraging that data to make the best decisions for the business. So these were things that were, challenges that our survey uncovered that needed to be overcome. And then obviously, right, 93% of organizations said that they expect that by improving data governance that they will have better outcomes when it comes to AI enablement as well as data quality. So not really revolutionary there. So what we found is that as we talk to the enterprise, that when we ask them about where they are with respect to data management maturity, the answers are staggering, right? So the C-suite says they'll rate their maturity at 4.34, right? Which equates to about 86% or an A minus, right? So the C-suite is saying, oh, data management maturity, we're an A, right? Think about all the problems we just talked about that they have. They may have data management practices that they put in place a long time ago, but that doesn't mean that they have data management practices that have been designed for AI, right? And that they're kind of building out this future-proofed environment where they can make decisions today on how they're managing data that will, remain in place and remain relevant going forward. So the C-suite is saying that we're at 4.34 out of 5 when it comes to maturity, but the managers are saying it's 3.88, so a solid C for management, right? I suspect, we didn't survey the data teams, but I suspect they'd probably give an E or an F when it comes to maturity. Anybody here for an F in the data teams? E? D? Lots of nodding. Yeah, I think it's I think at the C level, they want to be ready for AI. They want the answers to be, yes, we've got mature data management practices that are going to mean that we're going to be successful with AI. But the reality is it's really hard, right? And the reality is that the data ecosystem is very complex, and putting those management practices, data management practices in place takes time. So what we did at Actian was that we created a foundational data management maturity model. And if you come to the Actian website or stop by our incredible booth over there, you can take a look at this maturity model. And what it does is it has 8 facets of data management, and we've got a series of questions that we ask. And in answering the questions, it'll produce this spider graph that will show you where you've got your biggest challenges, and it may be that you want to address those first. So when it comes to this prioritization of where we are in data management, the spider graph will let you identify the areas in which you need to spend some time and address your challenges. So we'd love for you to come by the booth and maybe play with this. Maybe this is best done from your desk at work. But we do have at Actian it's 2 really interesting product tours that we've got at the booth. One relates to our data intelligence platform, and the other is our data observability solution. So with data observability, what we're looking at is the fact that, if you've got data quality challenges within the organization, raise a flag early if there's an issue with whether it's your data pipelines, whether it's conforming to the terms of your data contract. Being able to identify those problems early, incredibly important. And then our data intelligence platform is a governance platform that will enable you to be successful when you roll out your AI. So that's it from me. I'd invite you to visit the Actian stand over at N30. It's right by one of the doors that the exhibitors come in. We've got a really cool Scalextric racetrack set up there where you can win a Formula 1 Lego set today if you are the fastest of the day. We also are doing some demonstrations of our data intelligence platform, and we have a team of experts over there available to answer any questions that you may have as a result of listening to the presentation today, any questions you may have as you prepare for your AI deployments. And thank you for your time today. Cheers.